Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I am Roti4, this is GreyJedi91.
Hey guys.
This is Antoine Bandelay.
Be water, my friends.
And joining us for the first time on this series, Turk McGurk.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Turk. Why don't you give us a brief introduction into your experience with Avatar as a series?
Well, I think out of any TV series ever, I've seen it the most, all the way through, all three books. It actually started, for me, I had a friend who was super into it, and right before the live-action movie that we don't talk about, but I'm talking about it right now, came out, I agreed to go watch it, but of course, typical me, I'm like, I don't like going into something that I know nothing about, so let me just watch a couple episodes, get familiar, and then I ended up just binge-watching the whole thing within a couple of days. Well, that's how it started.
Yeah, that happens for people with this show, I think. You can't just
that was
just watch the odd episode.
It was 7 years ago, and then I watched it every night before bed, or at least an episode every night before bed for about 4 years. It was pretty weird. It's religious for me.
I don't blame you.
Did you become a regular viewer of Korra afterward then? Did you watch
Oh yeah,
that?
yeah.
Okay. All right.
I was super excited because they said it initially was going to come out in 20. I think it came out in 2012. So I was waiting for it. Yeah. I want to say they were teased at 2010, then it got pushed back 2011, then it got pushed back again. So by 2012, I was like, okay, give it to me already. I need it. But yeah, so I got to. That's cool though, because you get to sit with it for a while instead of you just became a fan and now you're watching the new stuff. So
it's a different thing when you're doing week to week. I think Matt and Callan were week to week, right? Weren't you guys?
I was watching it as of season 1, but not from the beginning. I got
it was several 2 from the beginning, but not
several episodes that aired before I got into it.
I came in a little bit into the end of season 1, so 4 episodes in or something like that. I can't remember. I think it may have been The Storm that I first started on, actually.
Oh, okay.
I said in the original episode, I think, because I look back on my dates. Anyway,
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah.
Hell of an episode to start
Oh,
with.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, Matt, take us away with the intro to this episode.
All right, so this is Book 1, Episode 12, The Storm, also known as the most artful and well-done information dump or exposition dump of all time. This is the episode where we finally get to know the backstories of Aang and Zuko before all their paths converged back in the series starter episode. There's a storm coming, and we get 2 parallel stories that are being told side by side with Avatar, or with Aang's group in the middle of trying to find food. And Sokka takes a job out to sea, and meanwhile Zuko is just being Zuko, and a storm's coming. There's not much going on. That's basically the setup for what we're doing here. Not sure how to submit it any more than that.
Well, the first scene that we have, I don't know why this dream got prompted for Aang. Maybe something in the Great Divide made him really worried about his friends. Maybe it was those the canyon crawlers that made him go, you know what, I almost lost my friends, so I'm going to have a dream about them needing me and me needing them. And that's what prompted all these things. That's what, guys, you guys talk bad about the Great Divide, but it prompted this whole episode right now, and Aang's dreams were dictated by that show. So there we go. I'm giving some importance to the Great Divide. But yeah, he's just having a dream about just can't skip it now. No
it's
longer
officially no longer filler.
Or else you'll never understand where this dream is coming from.
Audience,
no, I'm totally kidding, by the way.
Don't let Antoine pull that Jedi mind trick on the audience. That's bullshit. Anyway.
Totally sarcastic, but yeah, he's just having a dream about it's Aang. That's the best scenario for him, just having fun with his friends. But what I like about this is that it sets up the importance of him needing people and being needed as well, because what prompts all this is that he doesn't want the responsibility of being needed and having to be this hero, which I think is a good setup into the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and it also pivots nicely and introduces us, or reintroduces us, I guess, at this point, to the guilt he feels for having first kind of refused the hero's call back in the day. The first storm that leads him in to this dream and that he's seeing in front of him. That he got here because he ran from his fate, or at least that's how he sees it. In looking back on it, and it's that kind of guilt that drives the kind of core of the turmoil for this episode.
It's also well done because it opens up the question in our mind, what is the answer to what happened? Because we, at that point, don't know if it's our first time watching this.
Yeah, absolutely. You find him in the iceberg in the first episode, and there is literally like nothing as to how he got there.
Yeah, you get like brief flashes of
exciting.
him literally in the clouds
Yeah.
and going to the sea, and that is it. And this is kind of the
Yep.
first time we see the context for that situation.
I think it's interesting too, though. Like you said, it's side by side with Zuko, which, I mean, the only thing we really know of Zuko is he's the bad guy, you know, and he wants to
Right.
capture the Avatar. And I think that showing that sort of duality, so he's not just like this one-dimensional villain, is so cool. And that's when, for me, I'm like, oh, I like this Zuko character. Let's keep going. And he became
Yes.
like basically my favorite mental.
We've had hints
on that subject. Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. Sorry.
We've had hints throughout, but this is kind of definitely recognised as the episode that forged that kind of parallel connection
Yeah.
between
Yep.
them well and truly.
Yeah.
This
Yep.
and the next episode.
Right. Like on that subject, we didn't mention it before. I probably should have mentioned it in the intro. For the sake of sort of consolidating this discussion, we're going to be talking about like Aang's journey separately from Zuko's, and then we'll wrap up with how they're, all points converge later on. But yeah, I agree. This is the episode where you may have suspected that there's more to Zuko than meets the eye, but now after watching it, it does. And if you aren't already invested, I feel like this episode, you're in for the long haul. You're not just gonna be a fair weather fan with this series. Once you see this, you want to know how it ends for sure.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I like how they paired the kind of confusion or need to know his past with the characters in the universe as well. It wasn't just him contemplating in a scene alone in his room, a flashback. It was driven by the conflict with the crew on the ship, and framing it through the kind of non-characters that have been in the background up to this point, and their kind of their frustration with Zuko as he is at the moment, kind of adding to the reason we need to have this explored at this point of the series. It's not just
and it's actually kind of a
background
trigger
dump,
for him,
it's
like the storm itself, because it was the storm that led him to be put in an iceberg for as long as he was.
Yeah, for Aang, definitely, yeah.
But yeah, when he wakes up, we get some more Sokka funny bits where he's talking about wait, I forget what the dream was about. He's talking. No, Mumble was talking. He was like, "You're rude," and then he said something else.
He said that food was eating people at the market
Food
or
was
something
eating
like
people, that's right.
Yeah.
But the
People,
funnier line is the dream where he mentions Momo talking, which is something that will be
Yes.
coming up a long time
You
from
said
now.
some very unkind things.
Yes, that happens eventually. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me
Right.
of SpongeBob. What was the SpongeBob's pet, the snail?
Gary.
Gary?
Gary?
Gary, yeah. And Gary talks in his dreams like that. It kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah. yeah.
Same time period, by the way, the two shows. But yeah, that's the external conflict of this episode, is them just getting food, which again reminded me of, one of my favorite animes, Samurai Champloo, or that's always the conflict, the external conflict for every episode is, where's the food?
Cal will be back as well.
But it's great because that actually, you understand that there's travel happening here, and that it's important that where, if you're not working, if you're globetrotting, you're not just going to get food from nowhere. You have to do it yourself. You have to forage for yourself. So I like that comes up just from building out the world in that way.
I like how it also
There's an
points out the super convenience of Appa with the kind of retractable tail ramp as Katara just walks up the back. He's like, oh, I want an Appa.
Everyone who's seen this wants an Appa, if they're sane.
Yep. Rise up, people. But yeah, it's a good scene. I like the way it introduces us into the. I skipped a bit talking about the crew, but yeah, introduces us to that kind of element as Zuko's ship tends to just sort of float onto screen.
Oh yeah. But we're not splitting yet because they haven't had the. It's when the stories happen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but that happens after.
Yeah, so we do move on. That's good you brought that up, because we do move on to Zuko saying how he doesn't care about the crew, and it's kind of like an awkward situation because that one. Does this guy have a name, by the way? Goatee guy.
He's the lieutenant. He has a title.
He gets named later in the episode, or it's the Blue Spirit end of the episode. I think he's the one who gives the moving poetry. But Lieutenant Yin or Yan or Lin Lan or something like that. But it'll come up in the next episode. At the moment, he's just the lieutenant.
Episodes though. He was in the waterbending scroll. Like he was the one
which
Zuko
Matt did
sparring
bring
with
up
when
in that episode.
when Iroh changed course. Yeah.
But this is the first time the show kind of focuses on the characters as minor characters rather than just background drop, which is nice. But we've had the as I said before in previous episode, we've had the kind of quiet development in the background as you see the kind of conflict they've had and why the lieutenant is annoyed at this point. It's not the first. He's bringing this up now because it's been a recurring problem throughout the series that we ourselves have seen. I like that they took the time to show us that.
We mentioned this earlier, but do we still agree that this is still probably the B squad or the C squad that's with him because he's the banished prince?
For the most part, surely, yes.
Definitely.
I mean,
But
yeah,
they
why
are
would
learning.
they send him with why would they send him with the kingdom's best men? It's
Yeah.
I think I think this guy seems strangely competent to be in that group, though. So I wonder if
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like,
I feel
Maybe
like
he's a newbie.
But well, the interesting thing though is that as we understand, like, because we get Zuko's story from this guy hearing it secondhand or firsthand from Iroh anyway. Not everybody on that ship knows Zuko's past, so maybe he thought there was some glory in going in with the Fire Nation Prince. You know, like, I'm going to go around the world, you know, only to find out he doesn't know what he's doing. You know,
you would think the important people definitely don't really know what's going on with Prince Zuko. So yeah, they're probably just like.
Yeah, he probably thought this was like a standard mission, or like this was like a mission the Fire Lord himself believed in, rather than what it is. You know.
And it's definitely going to have contributed to the tension that's been building up. Well, at this point, all these years, because we know that they've been on the journey for that long.
It's been 2 or 3 years,
2 or 3
something
years,
like that.
It's applied roughly around 2.
It's always vague with Avatar time periods and ages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we move back.
But he kind of brings up the problem with the respect with Zuko, which is what hammers in this moment for me. It's driving in that you're a spoiled prince. You have no respect. You don't understand what you're doing. You're just firmly misunderstanding Zuko. But with every point he's saying, it's so kind of opposed to reality that it's driving home the actual feelings that Zuko is kind of. It's bringing to light Zuko's personal feelings on it, and it's hurting, and that's what drives his frustration here. And Iroh recognizes that as well. I love that.
Yeah, that's a moment. Well, Iroh would, because he knows what we find out. But it's a moment that plays almost better on a repeat viewing, because you know that this whole thing is about Ozai's notion of respect anyway. So that's like a trigger word for Zuko anyway.
Yeah, and I really you're definitely right. Repeat viewing is where you see that, because beforehand Iroh's kind of just doing a comedic, no, don't do it. You know, it's more of a play for humor. But when you know the tragedy of the moment, you recognize, as Iroh is in that moment, the pain Zuko is feeling from this, and the complete obliviousness, and understandable obliviousness of the lieutenant. It adds to the drama of the scene.
Cool. Anything else anyone wants to say about that scene, or?
No, I was gonna say. So at this point, is this kind of I guess we have to.
Well, not that the converge yet, because we said the waterman, the watermelon woman sells woman. It's actually a thing. My grandma is literally she does a ritual for finding watermelons, and every time she cuts into a watermelon and feeds me or brother with watermelon when we were younger, it was always perfect. And there was certain things.
The swishing
thing.
Yeah,
did she do the swishing?
You gotta pound it a certain way. There's a certain stunk that she listened for all this situation is totally true and valid.
I would not have thought that was true, but good.
Perhaps
to know.
You can answer the question then. Is it ripe or is it out of date?
It probably was over. It's probably overripe. Sorry.
So Aang fell for a cheap sales tactic. Good to know.
Swishing is good.
Yeah, switching. You hear a little bit of switching, but not as much as what Katara was hearing.
It's me, like the little lady when she's like, swishing is good. It's the ripe juices.
Very ripe. Very ripe.
Pretty much have juice in there going on.
But yeah, then Katara weirdly says, "Oh, I just remembered we're out of money." So it was a bit of a strange moment, but it leads us in.
Yeah, it's like, what? You guys got a lot. You got a basket full of.
Yeah, it's like, was she just messing with this person for fun? I don't know, but
It reminds me of, it kind of reminded me a bit of a little off subject, but in Korra, the very first episode of Korra, where she's like, "I'll take one of everything," and then she's like, "I don't have any money."
Yeah,
like,
what good are you to me? Provided, isn't
but
she?
it's like she's like, but I am the Avatar, so you want to help me out? And no, get out. They don't care. Yeah.
And the same thing this lady does. She kicks Sokka in the butt. It's like,
I know.
You have money,
Oddly violent as well.
I feel like Katara might have been hoping to coast through on one of my friends, the Avatar, if she had liked the fruit, but since she didn't want it anyway, I don't have any money. Never mind.
That was her next thing. It was but Aang's the Avatar.
Katara's a haggler. For sure.
What's saying? Oh,
Katara's a haggler as well, so she's definitely going to be the type to do that.
But yeah, it actually leads into the Aang being the Avatar leads into the fisherman storyline, where for once I feel like we actually get someone who rightfully
we brought this
up about Aang, because we were talking about that last episode. We're like, everyone just says, "Oh, hey, the Avatar's here, awesome," instead of being like, "The Avatar's here. You've been gone for 100 years. What the hell?" And this is the first time someone's like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, it has a negative response to his presence. Like, what the hell are you doing here now?
Yeah, outside of the Fire Nation, obviously, who have a bit more of a reason for it.
Oh yeah,
well,
they hate it.
But
it's more, it's like a thanks for nothing for 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, he's a grouchy old man, but at least the point you can understand why the point hits home for Aang. Not even counting the backstory that leads him to the really driving hit. It shocks him initially because this is something that that has happened. You know, intentionally or not, he abandoned the world in the eyes of these people, and this man kind of just throws that in his face rather abruptly. And with the talk
I
of the
think
storm
that's really
as well.
what causes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, and with the talk of the storm as well. That's got to be bringing back the memories, even fresher.
Yeah, I think that that response that he's obviously hasn't gotten yet since he's been out of the iceberg, which is like, well, where the hell were you, sort of thing, is I think what definitely triggers him flying off on his little glider, like, peace out. And Katara's like, what's wrong with you? Like, that guy's just a jerk. But he's having to deal with the fact that he did abandon the world, like you said, and it's because, like you said earlier, he was running away from his destiny.
And another parallel to Zuko, because the power we get from his moment and reaction to the scene is again stuff we learn, caused by stuff we learn later. Same with Aang. These guys are both reacting in ways that we wouldn't really appreciate until rewatching.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
I think unless we have more on that scene, we have the Iroh Zuko lieutenant scene where they have like I thought it was kind of funny because was it like a quickie Agni Kai that was going on there? Like, is that what that hand signal was about? It was just like quickie.
Yeah, it never got off the ground, whatever that was.
Kind of a I demand satisfaction light moment there. I liked how they kind of connected with the wrists and clanged kind of braces. Right. That was really cool.
That's a challenge right there.
Yeah.
I also like, doesn't Zuko say something like, you need to show respect or I'll teach it to you or something like that? Like, he's totally like emulating his crazy father, but you don't even know that yet until like a repeat viewing, because that's totally what Ozai did to him,
Yeah.
So I love all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and what's great about that is that even from just real life, like what you can take as like an allegory or whatever, like that's what happens when you teach people that way. They'll become that thing in which the way you teach them, and that's great that it's showing that it's reflecting within Zuko.
It's one of the
especially
driving struggles for him. Sorry, Tokyo.
I mean, for him, no, you're good. Especially, I mean, that specifically with parent and child. Sometimes you don't always like what your parents are, but before you know it, you are them, and then it's up to you to decide whether you realize it or not, or if you realize it or not, whether you want to be that, continue to be that, or be different. And obviously in Zuko's case, he doesn't want to be that, so, has a little more growing to do.
It's one of the more relatable aspects of the series that makes Iroh such a powerful character, because it's the Irohs of the world that keep the people from, or keep the Ozais in check, effectively. Zuko could have easily grown up to be that way if he didn't have Iroh's influence, and I think a lot of people have that force in their life through whatever kind of route form it takes.
Exactly.
Or if they don't, then they grow up to be Ozai.
Yeah, or if they don't,
like,
they have a much
cycle
more difficult
continues.
time breaking the cycle. Yeah.
Like Turk said, like that's what Zuko wants to be. Well, he has, or doesn't want to be, is what she said. He has to wake up to the fact that that's not what he wants to be. He doesn't know that yet.
Crossroads
it
of
takes
destiny.
Which is great. Which is why I like it's so great. Like
That's later. We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. This is where I think we start diverging.
Yeah,
this is when
I was gonna say, and which one do we want to cover first?
It's an excellent question.
That's true. I mean, I guess this is Aang's series. Technically, we should do him last.
Yeah. And he has more of a
whatever
kind of
you want, like
focus as well. Zuko's is more contained, isn't it? So let's do.
We'll do Zuko first. We'll ask him like, what is wrong with that kid? He doesn't know respect. And Iroh's like, yeah, you got to understand that he's a complicated kid. Like he's been through some stuff. And I think the initial thing was the scene with him just wanting to join the war room because he wanted to understand what ruling meant, which is that's true.
I think his thing was if he wants to be a great leader someday, he'd have to eventually.
I want to talk about, like, I remember, like, when I first saw this show, I didn't really I thought it was really striking seeing him in the past because he looks like a Disney prince. Like he can totally
he's adorable
like
kid.
Yeah, he looks like you can already see without ever knowing where this story is going. Like if events were different, that is totally a member of Team Avatar. That's the Fire Nation member right there.
Exactly.
Like you can tell. It's like it's all right there. Like what he should have been or what he should still be. Even though he's got this ugly patch on his face and like a great like a more severe haircut. Like these days, like you can see what he was or what he might yet be. Hopefully, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I guess that's why. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine. I was saying more than the scar as well on the visuals. It's the scowl. It's the kind of the hunched shoulders. It's the tension in his frame. It's everything about him. It's not just that one scar, which I really like the fact they pulled that off and they conveyed that.
Yeah.
This narrowing of the eyes constantly with the fade in.
So he's stomping around with his fist clenched, at all
shoulders
times.
raised. It's like, god damn it. Yeah, no,
it's a great point.
Really good contrast.
Great point. It's not just the scar; it's the way he carries himself is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's very obvious. I mean, literally, like he looks like he's carrying weight all the time, but he's got a chip on his shoulders. And I guess that's what I meant earlier by this is the first time you actually get to see that dynamic where, like you said, had things gone differently, he'd be part of Team Avatar. He was like, you see that in the past, like, oh my gosh, he was this adorable little kid, who's like, oh, I just want to be a great leader someday, and that's the first time you see Zuko in that light. So
I like as well in the next, it gets
with a little hair coming out.
Yeah. It'll be the next episode where it gets mentioned, but I like the fact that it's kind of bookends that point with the question from Aang, but we'll get to that later, about would we have been friends?
Right?
Yes.
Kuzan,
yes.
Kuzan,
yes.
yeah.
I love
it's
that.
The two episodes could almost be
Yeah.
two-parters in terms of the character work going on if they were more plot connected. But yeah, you're right. It's really cool. I also noticed as well, it's obvious, of course, but I hadn't really considered it on reviewing before. Iroh is the one that lets him in. Iroh is the reason this scene, he enables this scene.
Yes.
That's got
And
to
I had that
carry a
thought
weight
as well.
on his back shoulder for that, yeah.
That's why, if for nothing else, that's why he's on this mission,
Yeah.
because he feels some sort of blame for letting him go in there. Like it's not his fault what happened, but he opened the door literally for that to happen. You know what I mean?
And he even warned him too. He's like, "Don't speak a word." And the first thing he does, first order of business. What are you guys doing?
because it's something that is completely appalling to him. Even as a child, he understands right from wrong. The morality and their decision. And he's like, "What? How could you do that?" He's a good kid with a good heart.
It's the overt disgust of it as well. It's like, fresh meat for the grinder. It's like, oh Jesus.
Yeah, it wasn't even like he was saying like we have to sacrifice them for the good of the nation. It was just like, yeah, who cares about them? Like that's the delineation. That's like, well, come on now, like don't act like that.
The shittiest thing about it to me though is because Ozai never speaks. So for all I know, Ozai might have even agreed with Zuko, but still took issue with him for not minding his place. Like he might have said, you know what, we're not doing that plan. But that's not the point. You gave me an excuse to shit on my son. Yeah. He's that shitty. Like he's that petty. So it's like that's the thing that I think is just says volumes about Ozai, his silence on the matter.
This is the first time we see, quote unquote, him in an actual scene, probably outside of brief flashes. Sorry. Because I mentioned that, I forgot to mention the earlier scene. You see in the dream the flash of lightning. And you see for like half a second the vision that Roku in all his wisdom decided to show Aang of him raging against the sky with fire. You see that flash up on screen. So that's all we've really had from him. But this scene is where you kind of get still a silhouette, but you get more of a continuation. And I love the way that he conveyed his rage and anger with just the fire of the room. Didn't even have to give any vocal line or any close up of the silhouette kind of snarling or anything. Just the fire was enough. I love how it conveys power.
Masterful set decoration, scene setting.
It was beautifully done.
That's always been one of my favorite locations. By the way, it's just the Fire Nation capital. Just the way everything there looks is awesome.
Yeah,
it's really well tied into the themes of like anything that's going on in the specific context of why we're seeing it. It's always perfectly aligned. The duality of the Agni Kai, the grandeur of the scale of the Fire Nation as a contrast to everything else we see, all of it. It's brilliant.
It's pretty royal.
Yeah. And then Iroh goes on to say that that Zuko was okay with taking the Agni Kai challenge because he thought he'd be taking on the general that was speaking about that terrible plan. But then he realizes, well, technically he was actually, because he was in the war council of the Fire Lord, he actually disgraced the Fire Lord, and he had to fight his father. And then of course, as we established, Zuko at this point is like, no, I would never want to fight you, father. And he's like, no, get your butt up, and of course embarrasses him, gives him the scar.
Which I always wondered,
it's more than a physical scar.
And apparently that secret didn't get out as well, because there were a lot of people watching.
Because there was a lot of people who witnessed that. Yeah.
I mean, it could just be a country bumpkin of a soldier that didn't know, but still.
Yeah, I always imagined that was like the upper crust of like the Fire Nation, society. Because we see one of my favorite little details again when you rewatch is that fucking Azula is there.
Azula's there.
Yeah.
They designed her that soon.
Yeah, leering at the poor visage of Zuko, and Iroh turning away in shame as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not shame, but personal pain and shame at himself, rather, not Zuko or anything, obviously.
Pain, but
and Zhao,
Zhao, Zhao's there too. Yeah. Well, he's happy.
Well,
He's
yeah,
got like a
yeah.
slight smile.
Sorry, yeah. I guess I meant smirking. Don't know why I said family.
I think it's still, isn't it still even have like a fist or something? And she's like, no,
Yeah,
she's-
she's-
Oh yeah,
she's-
she's happy.
Yeah, like, get him, Dad. Like,
Yeah, it's like,
God,
crush
she's
him.
such
coming.
crazy.
Yeah.
An evil little child.
Yeah.
yeah.
But we'll get
Oh
to
man,
her
I can't
later
wait
as
till we get to
well.
those episodes. But
Yeah, yeah.
evil little child.
She would have had to have been like 9 or 10 when that was going on. Like she had to be
Right?
crazy young. to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah,
Yep.
because she's only 14. Like when we meet her properly in this series.
Yeah, she broke very quickly as a child.
Zuko's what, 15? Is Zuko
Zuko
15?
is
He's
16?
He's 16.
He's
Rocco's
16.
15. Yeah.
Zuko 16.
They're 15 when it first starts, because I think they're 16 at the end of the series, right? Because it's a year later. Am I
Right.
crazy?
But they never
in
actually
their
do the
sevens.
birthday. Is there a birthday episode?
We'll have to look it up because it's
No.
definitely mentioned
Yeah, we'll
somewhere,
look it
I'm
up.
sure. But I'm pretty sure he's 16 and 17 at the end, and then he's basically 1 year ahead of them all. I
Or
think.
15, 16, whichever one.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Around
Whatever.
that age, shall we
Like
say.
We didn't know a lot here.
Oh, and then also, Callan, you wanted to make mention of Hamill? Because when I first watched it, I didn't know it was Hamill.
Oh
I
yeah.
know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I picked up
I-
immediately on this one.
My ears are tuned
I-
to Mark Hamill.
Familiarity with the Joker helps.
Yeah. I'm like that weird kid. Like I was playing like Skyrim DLC like a year or so ago, and I recognized voice actors that were like, they were like amateurs on like some other project from some other game. I was like, I don't know why I can just like hear like people's voices and remember them. So Mark Hamill, obviously, you gotta remember Mark Hamill.
He is doing a slight Asian accent that it gets abandoned by the time this series ends, but it's totally Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
For the Agony
Yeah,
Kai
I
itself,
didn't catch that, no.
for the Agony Kai itself, I want to focus. I made a note somewhere. I want to focus on what he actually says because it's extremely thematically poignant. 3 lines he gives to Zuko as he's approaching him, and that's still in that silhouetted, menacing form. You will fight for your honor, rise and fight Prince Zuko, and you will learn respect. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but those are the 3 core driving forces of Zuko for pretty much the entire series until he reaches his redemption arc, kind of jumping off point, right? Like, I like how those 3 lines are kind of the core of the character and his perspective from this point in the series. I mean, how it's kind of clearly shaped him, and it's this kind of the more powerful scar of the moment that lingers to him, even lingers
It's
on
like
him.
PTSD.
Yeah, even to this day, that's the kind of the piercing thought that rings in his ears, and that's why the kind of you said earlier, Matt, the triggering of the respect line from the lieutenant was so heavy hitting.
I mean, arguably those are even like his traits after he switches sides, like I think you were saying. But it's like it's just the way it's like the difference in perspective. Like, what does Ozai think respect is, or what does he think is honorable? These crazy, odd, like nutball, sort of off the deep end, sort of theories that Zuko eventually learns to overcome, of course.
And look
It's
from his
it's
own
like
lens.
any other great Avatar villain. It's twisted ideologies. Just gone
Yeah,
too
those
far.
are always
with
the
what you
best,
think
I
is
think.
right. Yeah.
That's why I think Zuko is a better antagonist than Ozai for that reason, because he is just twisted for now until he gets better. Versus Ozai, that's just like kind of like just one-sided, and I
He's intricate.
I have no sympathy for what Ozai is doing at all.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But Zuko's
Yeah, I know-
obviously
yeah,
he's kind of like the
You really shouldn't. You really shouldn't. Like, if you do, somebody who's watching this, maybe get help. I hope you're not
Yeah.
sympathizing with
Yeah,
Ozai.
Ozai's not a sympathetic villain
Unless it's
at
from the
all.
whole
Unlike-
mental illness perspective, because there is that going on in his family. But apart
I
from
do
that,
think, I
Yeah.
think he is genuinely crazy or sociopathic, and there's
I
something
mean,
wrong
it's
with
probably
him.
where
Yeah.
Azula gets it from.
Man,
Azula's
yeah.
a nut. But I
Yeah.
can't get into
I mean,
that
I'm pretty sure
right now.
Roku. I'm pretty sure Roku mentions it. There is a sickness on the family or something, like a
It's,
craziness in the line.
it's odd to me because Ozai always goes through the motions of like he does acknowledge Zuko as his son begrudgingly maybe, but it's always been like notable to me anyway that he always calls him Prince. Like he doesn't like rob him of his title, like his royal title. Like he always calls him Prince Zuko. So it's like he has a son. His son is just nothing like what he wants him to be. He wishes he could like mold him into something that he thinks is worthy.
Kind of a
So like that's
Tywin
his frustration.
situation.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
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 and
very
again,
much
Tywin in his own way, Tywin is a fan favorite character, as horrible as he is. You know what I mean?
That's weird. We should do an analysis about Tywin versus Ozai and why Tywin works and why Ozai doesn't.
There's an argument for Ozai.
Parking lot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but basically, Ozai is one of the big criticisms of the show is that as a villain, Ozai is too one-dimensional. But at the same time, there's sort of an argument for why that helps the show thematically.
Yeah. Which we'll get
but
to.
yeah,
'cause
it's
I
a
think
whole end of a discussion we'll get to at some point.
Is there anything else you guys want to talk about with the Zuko story? Because it's about wrapping up.
I want to come back to something at the tail end of it, but it's makes more sense after we've covered Aang's, if that's okay.
Aang as well. Okay, cool. All right, cool. So when we start with, when first it starts off with Katara finding Aang in the cave, and initially he says he doesn't want to talk about it because it is hard for him to discuss, because he does have it's a character wound, is I think what they call it in the writing world, that he's self-inflicted on himself. But we start off with the establishment of the air scooter scene, and how he had buddies and friends when he was the air nomad, stuff like that. But then also showing that he is the best, and then people are like, "Whoa, like you're so cool," and stuff like that. So he's well liked within his group of friends.
Mm-hmm. There's all these like little clues to that. They don't have to come out and say, "Hey, you're the best of us." Like you could tell, like he's the only one with arrows. Like all those things that even go kind of unspoken. They're just the way that he takes to, like, he invented that technique. It's implied, right? Or said,
he's
right?
12.
Stated outright.
Yeah. 12 and he invented
I made it up. Oh my god! And then the monkey's like,
he made the technique. He earned his arrows before knowing he was the Avatar. So maybe it affected the master's perspective, but it definitely didn't affect his or the kids' interpretation. They just thought he was worthy of them. So that tells you a lot right there. It's like you said, it's really well kind of put together in terms of establishing him and his power level.
I also really like, I like the way that the color palette that was used to like establish we're in the past in the Fire Nation, as well as like all these reds and sort of yellows and beiges. This one is sort of like, I like it almost better. For some reason, it just speaks. More. Yeah, that washed out sort of luminescent quality, like that just screams like this is an air temple. Like it just seems right somehow.
It seems kind of
I don't even know why, but it
and,
seems right.
And like it's not quite there around the edges, kind of thing. It's a good effect.
And I also like that. I always wondered too, like how do people in this world suspect that someone's the Avatar? Like I know that they have the test, but that test only comes about after they have the suspicion. And I wonder, is like Harry Potter, is it just the fact that maybe they were in Harry Potter you have magic, kids have magic? Is it maybe was Aang like waterbending by accident by some point or something? Like how do they even think, or is it because he's so good at airbending?
Wasn't it the toy that he had when he was a
I
child?
understand, but they only did that test after they suspected that he was Avatar, because I don't know if they do that test for everybody.
I feel like maybe they do. I feel like because if you always know what nation the next Avatar will be born into. So maybe they do all have.
That's true.
I feel like of his generation, and you'll have, I guess, a 16-year gap in between the death of each Avatar, like in the rise of the next one, where who knows who the next one really is specifically. You just know where they're coming from generally. But I feel like the only exception we know of is Korra, who was
they don't all make it easy like that.
Yeah.
But I think that was for the sake of like writing and time. Like,
of course, definitely, yeah.
Yes, yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
And it was good for the character as well, because her whole point so early in the series was that she was so
deal
talented.
With it.
Yeah, it was the establishment of her character. Yeah, you gotta do. Yeah, it was perfect for the initial framing of her character as well, so it fit there. But I like the idea.
It does make sense.
Oh, sorry.
For Roku, because when Roku dies, I'm sure there's an establishment being like, okay, Avatar is dead. Let's send out a message and like tell like the air nomads, hey, look out, and then they would do the test at that point.
Yeah,
so
I mean, presumably it's immediate. The spirit just transfers,
it's immediate,
and you don't know who it's transferred to until
shows
you.
That.
Yeah.
It's not even
it shows
presumably.
That
it shows, yes.
Because you see Roku's dead.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I remember actually. Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, they did it too in book 2 of Korra. As awful as that was, the whole Avatar wand thing, like his spirit literally leaves him as he dies.
Yeah, and then it wakes up. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I was misremembering. But yeah, so the minute he goes back to the baby, then you just have to kind of clarify it with which one it landed on, I guess.
Right, exactly.
But I like the idea of the test.
Babies that week or something,
I like the kind of idea of the test and how it was going for your familiarity, kind of subconscious connection to your past lives, because it's a theme that's important for establishing how the avatars relate to the lineage they have kind of got brought on them now.
Again, it also provides that reason for why he's completely unprepared for his mission. Like, he didn't grow up all these years knowing I'm the Avatar. Like, he just found, from his perspective, he just found that out, like, before he got frozen. So it's new to him, too, even though it's 100 years old,
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why they rushed. I know it's because Sosin's comment was coming at that point in time. Yeah. Because he didn't, Azulon, I think it was Azulon, right, at that point?
Sozin still. It was still
no,
Sozin.
Still Sozin. Sorry, so that's why it's called Sozin.
Sozin, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There's a few generations there. Because like he didn't actually take over much of anything, so it's like they could have waited a little longer. I think they were just kind of jumping the gun.
Well, to be fair, they weren't 100% hasted there, because they did, think they need to finish the Aang's journey with the air training before moving. Right. It wasn't flying them out straight to the other elements. Stuff. So I think they thought they had still have a little bit of time. But it's just a case of, they didn't have the years that they thought they'd have. Because remember, it takes 12 years on average from their minds for the Avatar to fully form.
We didn't know. We don't know exactly what Sozin was up to, but they might have an idea that just went unspoken because Sozin mentioned that he spent the rest of his life looking for the Avatar. So who knows? Like maybe he's doing shakedowns in various areas trying to find the Avatar, and they're like, maybe we better hide him or get to work on this quicker than normal.
I feel like I'm missing something in that, or I never thought about it, or I know the answer and I've simply forgotten. But I mean, he ordered all the. When Aang was gone, they were attacked.
Yeah, they were
Fire Nation
attacked
burned
and
everything
genocide
down.
happened. Yeah.
It's like, why would he wait, 12 years to do that? That's odd to me.
I think maybe he just it might be a matter of not having been ready because he had to rebuild his forces because Roku had smacked him down a few times before
True,
that.
could be it. But I feel like I've never actually thought about that because he's like, yeah, burned them all, so the Avatar wouldn't be a thing. And it's like, you waited 12 years to do that.
To be fair, Matt and I had a discussion
right.
recently that might explain this. We realised how almost impossible it is for the entire plan to be carried out full stop, because how the hell do you exterminate an entire civilization of airbenders all around the world?
Right.
Yeah, they're all
at the
nomads.
same time.
The hardest, nomads. They're the hardest one to do that.
Yeah, even if they were all living in that temple and didn't go anywhere else, all they have to do is every single one of them scatter on their gliders and fly in different directions. How do you get all of them? Like, realistically,
that's more of I feel like more of a Fable kids show type thing, because the Fable is everyone was killed, so he's the last one. Versus if it was a more reality.
Of course,
type,
of course.
I like to think that maybe the initial attack was pretty devastating, but it took years to wipe them all out.
Yeah.
Hunting them down.
Hunting the
because
Jedi.
that's the only thing. That's the only thing that makes even a little sense to me, because even that's a tall order.
And we know that the bison
as evil as he was, I feel as evil as he was, he would have not waited 12 years. He would have started and gone at least to obviously the main air temples, unless no one knew where they were, kind of thing. Which I feel like maybe that could be a thing, and they were looking for the air temples.
Yeah.
But even then, wouldn't the airbenders be on higher alert? Which is kind of why they were like, no, we need to tell you now. It's troubling. We're supposed to wait till he's 16, but shit's about to go down.
That's a good question, because Ozai was interrupted. How long does Sozin's comet's effects really last? That's a question.
It was only a day.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
That's a lot of time. If you position, maybe that's what he was waiting for. You know what I mean? Maybe he was I'm only going to get one shot at it. I'm going to wait for the comet, maybe it was 12 years on.
Roku says in his initial meeting with Aang that was what he used to push so far in the initial drive. And then the fact that he then lost that makes sense for why it took 100 years to get to the point we are now. Because if the Fire Nation was able to take the front of the war and do so well initially without the comet, then they would have won the war by now. So the reliance on the comet is kind of established on that level, I think. But it just how long it took to plan, how successful the initial attack was, all that jazz, it's kind of up in the air. And I'm completely with you, Antoine. It's definitely the whole Fable kind of they all were defeated kind of thing. But it is definitely a kind of logical inconsistency in the world. I like to imagine that there's a secret clan or temple of airbenders somewhere in the world, even in Korra's period, that no one knows about. And because obviously we know the bison survived, so it's technically possible. Mm-hmm. No one knew.
I think they seemed like that even when they were first introduced in book 2 of Korra, when Wan discovers them. He's like, whoa, who the hell are you guys?
Yeah.
They're just hidden away, go away.
So with Aang having all this information, he goes back to his friends, and when they realize also that he's the Avatar, they're like, well, yeah, I mean, you're already good. Now it's you're too good. You can't play with us anymore. It wouldn't be fair, And he takes that to heart,
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I like that they're not being bullies or anything. There's not you're the Avatar now. It's not fair. They are being reasonable from their perspective.
No, it's just hey, it's just not fair to play with.
Fair.
It's just kids being kids and unintentionally cruel. It's.
Which he's 12. You can't tell him to stop being a child at this point.
Yeah.
He's 12. So
Definitely.
That's pretty sad.
He should have countered. Well, I was already a master and you guys weren't. What was the problem then?
So what's the I'm not going to use anything else.
Yeah, it's too timid for
Aang.
Aang. It's just okay, and then walking off is exactly the sort of thing he would do. It makes it seem a lot more powerful for the fact that's been established up to this point.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually it's in character for him to walk away from a conflict feeling defeated, and instead of actually confronting the issue or trying to convince people otherwise.
His problem with earthbending, but I won't get into that either.
Especially at this point before he's kind of accepted the call.
That's probably one of my favorites because it's Aang actually having an issue with something.
But yeah, he goes back.
But yeah, he has the Pai Show game.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
You're meeting the Pai Show game first, sorry, yeah. With Gyatso, Everly Lovable. Did you have the show?
It seems like all old men love that game.
What?
Do you have a Lotus tattoo?
I have a
Oh yeah,
Paisho
she
top.
totally does.
Paisho-
She
awesome,
totally
nice
does.
Can't really see it, but it's like
Yeah.
the colors of the White Lotus and like Korra.
Very cool.
So
But yeah, Gyatso has that kind of game and cheers Aang up a bit. There's a lot of cheering Aang up in this episode, and I like the fact that it never gets old. Like they frame it differently, they have different reasons for him and different levels for him being sad. You know, they kind of push the emotional side of the story without it ever getting stale. It's very well done.
agreed.
Yeah, and I think it was the last straw was that, well, because Gyatso is his guardian, which I guess that's the, again, I think we talked about this briefly before, but like what is the parentage situation with
I feel
the air nomads?
I feel like none of them are raised by their parents. Maybe not even in the same temple in which they're born, for all I know. Like, isn't one of them is all female? Is it which one is that? The Western?
Yang Chen's, but whichever that one is, I think.
It's
Well,
the one that's
obviously.
upside down. The one that we see
Western,
in book 3 is.
Western,
Western.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, it's the
Western.
Western Outer Temple, the one that's upside down.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, I feel like Gyatso's like.
Oh yeah,
his-
wait, and they're all guys
the
in
end-
this one. Now think about
Yeah,
it.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
they're
think
always-
there's 2 of each. Maybe there's 2 of each. Like maybe north and south is all guys, and
Guy,
east and west.
guy,
You know what I mean?
Where do they get these children?
Yeah, I'm saying
Well,
like, what
presumably
is the
they
story
take them
behind
Jedi
it?
style.
I've always asked that, and yeah, that's sort of what I assume. Like, oh, maybe they just take the airbending children, but how the hell do they know they're airbenders?
They're all
yeah,
it's
they're all
the only
airbenders
nation
as well.
It's the only nation where everyone is a bender. Yeah.
So presumably
So I
they
feel
take them Jedi style.
Maybe you go like when you're like a certain age, they send you like, okay, if you want to reproduce, you go like, live at this temple for a while and learn their ways and find a mate, or maybe not even a mate, but whatever. You know what I mean? Who knows what their culture is?
Point is that Gyatso is his father
Yeah.
figure effectively in this situation. So now that they're trying to separate the two, that's really going to hit, Aang hard. Is like, well, I don't want to be separated from my Gyatso. And then it's funny because even when Gyatso comes, he's kind of like, no, I'm not going to let you take it away. So that could have been a story where they
Right.
both
Yeah, I was
like
thinking about
escaped
that. Yeah.
and actually,
Yep.
well, that'd be kind of interesting. Alternate, what if Gyatso and Aang left, the Fire Nation came and attacked and killed everybody there, and then they were like the only two. That could have been a different, scenario of the
Which,
story.
by the way, but we know that Gyatso's badass because there were lots
Oh,
of
yeah.
Fire Nation corpses,
Mhm.
and that
took
again,
on like
that
20.
was and during
That was dark
what I
for a
During
kid
Sozin's
show.
comic.
Jesus
Oh, yeah.
Sozin's
Christ.
comic,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. During Sozin's
So
comic,
you know
like,
that
he was,
he's got, yeah.
He also
I do
trained
not
with the
have him on my
Avatar.
list. I
The
don't have him on my
previous
list. I gotta change that. Keep talking.
it's true. Yeah, he trained with Roku. That's right.
Yeah, so we know he's good. Another innovator as well because he creates the sky surfing. But anyway, that's way off topic again.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely
Yeah,
a
it's really
grandmaster
good.
tier.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
But where are we going now?
So after, that's pretty.
He runs away. He runs
the
away,
Meeting. Yeah, he runs away. Storm comes.
Interesting point as well because he is remembering Gyatso finding the letter, but presumably
Yeah,
that's just the way he
no,
chooses to remember it.
Yeah,
I like to imagine
Yeah, I
that's
was
how he
gonna say-
hopes he received the information.
I was gonna say like that's just that's a moment in the writing process where they chose to show us like what I assume is the reality, and like it's a fill in the blank
Mhm.
because even
Yeah.
that sort of washed out sort of quality is kind of gone. Like that just looks like nighttime to me. It doesn't look the same as the rest of the flashback, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I'm probably leaning in more.
Yeah,
along
it's not
that as
flashback.
well.
That's like in episodes supposed to be like what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's more along the lines of that as well. But in theory, it could be the case of just Aang choosing to imagine that's how it happened because we don't know outside of that moment whether or not Gyatso would have let them take him away, kind of thing. So.
It's actually
Up for
kind of nice if you
debate.
think about it that he went to sleep for as long as he did, and the first thing he wakes up to is like a pretty young lady. It's
Yeah,
like, oh,
that's-
that's the best thing to happen after you've been out
I
for
mean,
100
he's
years.
Especially in the frozen
He's
wasteland of the
super
South.
giddy about it too. Like
Yeah.
even like the very first thing that he says is like, "I need to ask you something. Please come closer. Like it's gonna be the serious thing. Will you go penguin sledding with me?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "What?" Yeah, that's and then they play that up the entire time as like the first thing he got to do was see Katara, and even in this episode specifically, about I won't get too into it, but about maybe meeting Katara was the right thing to happen. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big
Well,
point. Getting
yeah.
into later.
But
So
yeah,
does
Matt,
that-
you said you wanted to after we did the end of
Well, yeah.
Aang's story.
Well, it
the
kind of
thing.
concludes. It kind of dovetails off of his talk with Katara. So like Katara is sort of like trying to comfort him. He's like, yeah, well, whatever. And she's like, well, you give people hope, and and he's like, or like, look all the good we've done so far in the short time you've been back, and you give people hope, and he's like, yeah, you're right. And jumping back to Zuko's, like the guy's like, so finding the Avatar is the only thing will return things back to normal, and I was like, oh, it'll never be back to normal, but the Avatar gives Zuko hope. And Aang gives Zuko hope, but in a completely different way
Yeah,
from
right.
what Katara meant.
That's
That's
odd.
poetry. Like that,
Yeah.
it's poetry though. Like that's
pottery.
that's what I'm talking about. Like this is pottery. It's like this is like good storytelling. Like I mean, like that's something I love. Like that's great.
Right.
Like
And-
that's adult storytelling. That's great writing.
Absolutely, and backed up again by the fact that this is only a reinforcement to the already existing parallel that is just flowing throughout the story in these two character arcs. You know, it's the bridge between and the kind of connection Zuko has to the Avatar. Also helps explain a bit more why Iroh is so on board with it initially. Like he's hoping to steer Zuko away from the kind of ultimate conclusion of his what he thinks is his journey, but he understands that for the moment the Avatar is what's fueling Zuko's hope as a character, and he recognizes that. And you see throughout moments in this episode the kind of the eye contact of him going, oh, okay, but look, you don't give up hope. You can still find the Avatar. You know, that kind of thing. It's quite powerful.
That moment like where it like transitions between like the photos of like his past where he's like a happy kid to like what he looks like now. Like that's great. But I also, whose hand is that's on his shoulder?
Presumably father.
So that's what I always interpreted that as well. But and that's to me like that. I love stuff like that, like where it like opens like the door to like an exploration of like a
Yeah, that's
like
gotta
a
be
past
father
time.
for sure.
Like there's a whole different. It's not Iroh then. Like that, yeah, you know, because it's like a man's hand. It's not Ursa. So
I'm pretty sure it's.
No, no, it is. You can see it because in the previous one, the wide shot where it's like I think it's him in Azula running in the field actually.
Right.
That's definitely Ozai for sure.
Probably on the
I
Amber
love
Island
stuff
area as well at that moment.
And I don't even need that story, but I just like knowing at one time this was something like a happy family, or at least tried to be. You know, which is.
And it explains why Zuko
that's
cares
very
so much
sad.
in this moment. It's why he's so sad in this moment. You know, he's happy then. This is what I had, and this is why I care. You know, if it was always an abusive, horrible father, why would he want to be? You know, why would he care about his respect or his honor? You know, so it helps set that up, and it doesn't do it so much that it throws it in our face and kind of blurs the themes of the series as a whole.
Right, and we'll get into it further later on, and we already kind of touched on it. But like, even though I do think Ozai's crazy, I don't necessarily think he was always that way.
Right. It could just be the mission that did it to him, like, you know, like trying to go up to expectations, especially with Sozin's comment being so close.
I mean, it could be very similar to Zuko, but he didn't ever have that redemption
He
arc.
didn't have an Iroh.
Well, I mean,
he had an Iroh, but he was back in Iroh early stages.
Well, Iroh at that point wasn't Iroh that he is today, because we got to remember that Iroh was a totally different character in his youth. So.
And Ozai himself was the son of another Ozai, basically.
Right.
And so it's similar to, you know, obviously art replicating real life is that vicious cycle of father and son and becoming, whether they want to or not, whether they're treated terribly and they understand that they have to break the cycle or not. It's that vicious cycle. So it seems like obviously they come from a long line of pretty evil men. So
yeah.
And then we go on to they've gone through these little arcs. You've seen both their backstories, and then we get the storm itself and how they are starting to have little changes, where Zuko's a little bit more of a thoughtful leader, and then Aang kind of comes to terms with holding the responsibility of being an Avatar by way of helping Sokka and fishermen who are silly, like going fishing when there's a huge storm coming and everything like that. So that's nice, like as a nice wrap up in an action piece, you know.
Yeah, we spoke about poetry before, and we've had kind of story and narrative poetry, but there's also visual poetry going on here because we haven't really mentioned the storm on screen yet, but it's been looming in the background this entire time, along with the tension and the building conflict throughout the story. When we get to the climax and the kind of clashing of the emotions that we have been building up throughout the episode, the storm, that's when the storm's at full force. It's building up in the first place, and afterwards when we get to the conclusion, it's when it starts to fade. Eye of the Storm moment and the actual finale. You know, it's tied to the entire sequence of the story.
Right, but like this whole thing, yes, there's a storm. Like that's really the only people putting up with that is poor Sokka and that old man, you know, but and you know Zuko's random crew members, but like for our main characters, our main two, Zuko and Aang, that storm has been an internal one, and they both have a moment of change and grow. Like toward the end of it, where Zuko puts his crew first for once, and Aang takes responsibility, and the storm sort of clears. And like you know, like that's again poetry. Yeah, like this is like really good writing.
It's the representation of their emotional turmoil visually on screen for us. You know, the looming like, oh god, it's the depression's kind of creeping up again, and then the clashing of lightning and blast, and I hate, you know, shouting at the world, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, I guess to the part we haven't gotten there yet, the Eye of the Storm part.
Well, we're getting there.
We're getting there. You know, we're in that discussion. Yeah.
I mean, essentially, there and then when he chooses to I guess, consider the safety of his crew and having Aang fly by. Isn't that same part? I thought it was.
More or less.
Yeah, that comes slightly
talking,
afterwards.
I was talking more about the resolution of the episode, like in general. We're like, because like
Okay.
they're totally back in the cave, like, hey, like this is what happened in this episode.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we-
yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, I
Like, and
I
the
know I don't
storm's
want to.
over. Yeah.
I don't want to move too far ahead without us like talking about what we wanted to talk about.
Well,
but
no, that's
yeah.
fine. So the storm, we'll get into it sequentially then. The storm
One-
hits and the ship is about the same time that Aang kind of comes to his comforted moment with Katara in the cave. The thing that brings Aang into the situation and brings the stories converging where we can go back into it as one together is the woman who... I just want to raise the point. How the hell did she get up there? She didn't know he was there.
Yeah,
How the hell did she get there
She's a
so
secret-
quickly?
Hey, whoa. She's a secret airbender. You already exposed her. Remember?
Good point. Good point. Yes. And she didn't want to expose it any further. That's why she said, I'm staying here.
I'm staying here.
Yeah.
I saw that more as like old love, like where you're like, yeah, that's my husband and everything, but you know what? I'm not going to risk life and limb for him. You know, like that's old love
Well, I
right
mean,
there.
He's
Even
old
like
enough.
it's sort of it's like back and forth where she's like, go ahead, go out there, and then she's like, oh, go save them, and then it's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
I'm not gonna go with y'all, just go and get them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just do it though.
The tough
I think they
baby
have
of the world.
it's like a bipolar thing because she's his wife and his employee apparently. So there's like a love.
Yeah.
There's a true love-hate relationship going on there.
Yeah, but it was a little nitpick that stood out because, every show has them. Even this
I want to
episode.
discuss bending a little bit because we get lightning redirection for the first time. With
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
So
Yes.
so the people for
Right.
you two who watched it while the show was going on, was there
Yes.
ever like that discussion? Like, what did he just do?
Absolutely not. To me, it was like, oh, that's a cartoon
Yeah.
moment. Like,
Yep.
look how funny the old man. I never read into it until like I rewatched it after watching the episode Bitter Work, where he's all, oh, you got to be loosey goosey. I'm like, wait a minute. They dropped that like way back in season 1. That's crazy. Like, but yeah,
That's
no,
great.
that
We
went.
have those
I
moments
have
where they
never
drop
heard
those
that
things.
moment described thus.
I thought he
Loosey
Hey,
goosey.
he like Lucy. No, he remember he was like
He
in the
did
Harlem-
it.
No, I know.
that.
No, I know. It's hilarious. It's brilliant. It was just the way you
But,
phrased it. Sorry.
oh man, what was I gonna say about that? Oh, they do really good job of setting stuff up like way before like it actually
Yeah.
like pays off. So it's like
Mm.
good on them.
But
Good
yeah,
stories,
I
though.
know where Matt's coming from because it is played as a comedic moment, with the frazzled hair and the kind of shocked expression.
Yeah, so it
you
looked
know.
like it was just like, oh, that's just comedy.
Yeah, and that's why it was much the same thing for me. Was it's a cartoon
Yeah.
moment? But I will say it did stand out the motion. The actual movement that he does in that moment, replicating what we see later in more detail. He does actually do that there. So that stood out. I just didn't really know what it was supposed to mean at this point.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah,
And then
I mean,
I
also
thought
the
they
one
didn't
with-
have-
oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to talk about bending, so I'm going different subjects. So keep going.
I was just gonna say, like, we've had the moment where like Aang has like launched himself into the air through sneezing. I thought it was just another one of those.
Another, like,
Yes, it's bending, but I mean, I didn't take any implications from it, or like, oh, what does this mean, or like, where's this going at all?
Mhm.
I thought it was a joke.
I thought that they didn't like actually have him do it successfully until Azula, the first.
oh, when he caught her hand, the first
yeah,
episode.
kind of
first
how
first
to
episode
focus
of
on it.
season.
Wait, that's the
two.
second instance we said it without explanation. We just
That
kind
again,
of-
that again went over my head. Like again, you know.
That was when it started to make
Yeah,
sense
same.
in
I'll
that
be honest with you,
moment.
I'll be honest with you. The first time she bent lightning because her fire's blue anyway. Like I didn't
You
actually.
just thought
put
that was her
it
fire.
together.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like super concentrated fire or something. I
That's the
didn't
same.
understand.
That's the same episode, yeah.
Yeah,
It's the
Same
Those-
episode, yeah.
Avatar State.
It's her
yeah.
introduction.
But also the bending that I want to talk about, not just Iroh, but also Aang and his water bending. He gets to do like a little bit more of it. I like the one sequence he had where the mast was coming down on the ship, and he just went phew, 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 and like had the water jets like come up and like save them. And then also he has the water bubble to save everybody. But I like a lot about that scene in particular. It again shows like he's like, this is what could happen if I mess up. My friends could die. Like you have like the very soft scene. Where you see Katara and Sokka and Fisherman just like floating there, and I thought that was really beautiful just to get into Aang's perspective and understand where he's coming from. Like I don't want to be put in a situation because I want that dream I had at the beginning of the episode.
Right.
I want that to be my life. I don't want war and death and like storms to be my life. And I think that just worked really, really well the way they had that going on
Yeah,
in the show.
absolutely.
A second-
And- sorry.
Second chance for those things too, Antoine. Like all those things you listed, he sees in them a second chance for them. Not gonna let it go
And I
again
mean-
this time.
Yeah.
Even in his existence, like I was saying earlier, is that even though he ran from his destiny previously and he messed up all that. He wasn't there for his people when they needed him. He's here now, and he got to meet Katara. You know, he even tells her that, like, well, I got to meet you. So then he starts to, like you said, it's sort of a second chance to turn everything around.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of reinforcement in this episode of Katara's earlier statement when he originally went into the Avatar state before, we're your family now. You know, it's hammering that in for him and letting him really kind of appreciate that and separate the idea of what he had with what he has now and how we can focus on it moving forward. But I also like...
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I also like the fact that this powerful moment is once again, as throughout the rest of the series, this episode and the series as a whole, paired with Zuko's powerful moment of coming to realize the lesson that Iroh was trying to teach. Well, not the lesson, the reminder, because Zuko already knows this. Focus on what matters. The crew is important. Save the crew. He sees the Avatar and he's like, nope, got to help the helmsman on the bridge.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's a powerful moment. We get a lot of moments with Zuko kind of looking up at the Avatar and going, nope, got to do something else.
and the thing about that is, because ironically, what started us on Zuko's mission in this episode was like him saying the safety of the crew doesn't matter or something like that. He spoke up in defense of those little guys. Like that's what this is all about. So of course he's not going to betray that now. Now
remember
he knows
who you really are.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Iroh. I forgot. Got caught up. Like he that's why he's here.
And the apology comes later as well. Just to bookend it beautifully. It's like, I'm sorry, Uncle. It's like, apology accepted. He recognizes all this, and we're seeing it play out. It's why this episode is so beautifully powerful. It's not just that we finally get to learn about their past. Like, no one cares about that. That's just exposition. It's the way it's presented and how it bleeds so perfectly into the present kind of states of the characters and what they will be moving forward from this point. It's beautiful.
The past definitely wouldn't matter if it didn't serve purpose to the story now or the current story. If it's like, oh, when I was a kid I used to do this, it's completely irrelevant now, but it's cool, right? That's often a problem that I have with characters that I guess often on a tangent, but with the Star Wars stuff, it's like, cool, we get to see what they look like when they were kids. It has nothing to do with anything now, so I don't really care, kind of thing. So I think that this series always does that really well. It's like some sort of past experience, but it's relevant to what they're going through now, or it's important.
Are we wrapping up on that point? Like, because I think that's...
I think it's the end of the episode. Yeah, we can. Unless anybody has final thoughts, I think we can wrap up this episode. Because there's a lot of discussion that we can have that leads into the next, I think.
Definitely, there's lots of kind of bookends in that second episode.
Because this really should be a two-parter, honestly. This.
But
I feel like it works without being one, because as I said before, that it's the plot, the lack of the connecting plot that means it's not a two-parter. But the character work going on is very much joined together. It's the establishment and reinforcement.
It's an internal two-parter, not an external two-parter.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, this just to wrap up my thoughts on it, kind of dovetailing off what Turk was saying, like, to me, like, that's, you don't necessarily need, origin stories aren't worth anything if they're bad or if they don't add anything, but like, there's nothing better to me than like a well done one, and this is one of the best ones I've ever seen. Definitely, without question. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I should have. This is my favorite absolutely episode of book one. By far, is The Storm, and I think we've covered in depth why at this point. So that's my thoughts on. Yeah,
completely agreed. Sure. It's beautiful. It's it's poetry, as we've said before. It's just elegant poetry in visual form. But yeah, that's our thoughts on episode 12, The Storm, guys. Right? Anything else anyone want to mention, or that's all done?
I mean, well, one little note: the fish thing being like, fish ain't meat. That's also a thing in real life as well. There's people who don't believe fish are meat. But,
really annoys
that's
me.
all I have. That's all I have.
Love that.
It's flesh. It's meat. That's the distinguishing thing. Anyway, but yeah, so that's what we're going to do on that one. That's our thoughts. Let us know what you think, guys, in the comment section down below. Looking forward to seeing you next week for the kind of bookend of this episode as a character piece, which is the Blue Spirit. I am Retty 4, and I still don't have an outro.
Great Jedi 91. Take care, guys.
That's Juan Bandalay. Remember, be water, my friends.
Turk McGurk. Water Tribe.
Another one?
She came up with an outro faster than you did, Kellen. You've had 3 years.
Bye-bye.